equally criticized in equal measure. Jamil Salmi, he has done a lot of work for UNDP and UNESCO. He cites three complementary factors as prevalent in world-class universities. One, a high concentration of talent as represented by faculty, students, and research scholars, abundant resources to offer a rich learning environment and to conduct advanced research, and favorable governance features. Many of you must be tech-equipped institutions. In the first phase, the focus was on enhancing undergraduate experience and employability. In the second phase, which is going on now, it is PG education and research, and I'm part of an expert advisory group. We are promoting good governance because performance will not result unless the institution follows good governance practices. And therefore, we have issued a guide. Dr. Anandakrishnan is also a member of this group, and we hope that, I mean, if you look at it, there's a self-review questionnaire that we give to the institutions. If you read the questions, you will realize why, if your institution is not a good institution, why it is not so. Mashelkar, the former Director General of CSIR, who calls himself a dangerous optimist, he had written a book 2 years ago. It is called Reinventing India. He talks specifically about world-class universities. He says, I asked the question, do we have any world-class universities in India? He answers it, no, it's not. We don't have an institution in top 100. Can we create them, he asks. Because he is an optimist, he says, yes. What do we need? He gives 5 factors I'll come to in a minute. Typically, it is crucial to create a great intellectual environment. It is an abstract phrase, but if you think about it, university leaders can work towards it. He points out that there are 5 key factors prevalent in WCUs. 1, absolutely uncompromising pursuit of excellence, both in teaching and research. Continuous thrust not only on working at the frontiers of research, but also creating new frontiers, not only following, but also leading in at least some areas. Uncompromising attitude towards selection of both faculty and students, going for the very best, and that too on a globally competitive basis. We are closed in our country to the entry of foreign faculty. In the IITs, some people have been admitted now. I mean, they have recruited now. But typically, you know that the innovations in the US, the Silicon Valley, it was created by a bunch of immigrants. Read Vivek Wardwa's blogs. 4th one, undying commitment to the true institutional autonomy without any political interference whatsoever. If you have political influence, if you have bad governance, forget about it. Full understanding of the route to Lakshmi through Saraswati, that means wealth from knowledge. In research, if you remember, if you recognize, you put in money in order to get knowledge. But the opposite is also something that we should be doing. Mashelkar has been talking about it. He has accomplished quite a bit of it when he was Director General. You must create wealth through knowledge. So what do we have to do to create world-class research-led universities in India? A prescription of 5 recommendations. 1, political will and ambition and massive funding. If we don't have the strategic direction and the resources going into it, there's no hope again. I won't go into details of this. Secondly, he says, an understanding that in future, the private sector will have to play a critical role in higher education. The government cannot do everything. We need to put explicit demand on science and technology. We need to recognize that there is nothing like intellectual democracy. There is a law which is called the Lodkas law. 1% of population usually carries 90% of intellectual energy. If you are looking at excellence, if you are looking at high quality, this must be respected. We must benefit by throwing open the doors of our academic institutions to foreigners. Now, he is a pragmatist. We must recognize that in the special social circumstances that we have, the importance of an astute balance of expansion, inclusion, and excellence. Balancing expansion, inclusion, and excellence in Indian context requires great will, skill, and innovation. We have to think out of the box and come up with solutions. How important are rankings to universities? There was a book in 2011 written by Ellen Hazelcorn, a professor in Dublin University. She said that rankings demonstrate the new environment of higher education and act as a driver of change. The extent to which these changes are productive or useless is still controversial, but higher education institutions are worried about the impact on the reputation of their institution, individuals, and the country as a whole. The whole country is asking questions. Editorials are being written. The ministry is worried why we don't have a top-class university. Looking at it from a positive point of view, rankings provide an opportunity for benchmarking. Because benchmarking, it has the world list of great institutions and the national list of institutions as given by not accreditation agencies, but our national magazines. Many people do not believe the rankings in these magazines, but they are getting more and more sophisticated and transparent. They give the methodology, and you can check quite easily that the institutions that they refer to as the best are indeed the best. They provide opportunity for benchmarking. What is benchmarking? The International Benchmarking Clearinghouse says the essence of benchmarking is the practice of being humble enough to admit that someone else is better at something and being wise enough to try to learn how to match and even surpass them at it. One of the things that we are going to propose is to make gap analysis. Professor Jnanam talked about some agencies coming to the rescue of institutions to help them to move up the rankings. It is a positive step. They help you to analyze the gaps, the gap between what you are and what you want to be. Whatever the shortcomings, the very existence and compilation of ranking lists infuse quality consciousness among the institutions. However, in order to be acceptable to the majority, the methodologies must be transparent and verifiable. Now, here is something that Malcolm Gladwell, the author of Tipping Point, Outliers, and What the Dog Saw, is a thought leader. He compared different cars in the beginning, and then he has come to, in the article in New Yorker, he compares different institutions. Is it right to compare different types of institutions using the same ranking list? Example here, or less developed countries. I'll take 3 sectors. In the economy sector, for developed countries, it is favorable trading opportunities and expanded markets. For developing countries, deregulation, enhanced privatization, and currency integration. In education, for developed countries, it is enhanced markets for educational products, processes, and services, including transnational education, making up for reduced indigenous demand. Because in the US, for instance, it is well known that the young people, they want to take up law, medicine, hospitality, hotel, and things like that. They're not very much interested in engineering. In India, as an example of a developing country, it is study opportunities abroad for those who can afford it and competition to local institutions. Employment sector, in developed countries, it leads to erosion of jobs, competition from low-wage workforce from less developed countries. For developing countries, it leads to offshore jobs and opportunities for short-term employment abroad. Now let me say a word about the gap between extent, potential, and performance. In India, in every sector, education, employment, business, and so on, we bemoan the huge gap between the potential we have and the performance we don't have. Here I would like to quote Mahatma Gandhi. He said, the difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problems. It's a huge gap. What are the real impediments? The last but one slide. The real impediments are our world rankings of current countries by corruption, transparency in governance, ease of starting and doing business. In all of these lists, we are at the bottom. We have a recommendations culture, an influence culture, a chalta hai attitude, complacency and procrastination, populism, and mindset of preferring excellence over mediocrity. Now let me show you the road ahead. Hopefully, this is where we will be going. The destination is clear. Globally competitive and academically reputed systems and processes. That's what we want in the education sector. The roadmap, we have several national policies and benchmarking and world-class university descriptions. At the moment, you have the 12th plan document. We have the RUSA, which also contains a number of recommendations. For example, the funding will be on the basis of norms, on the basis of performance. But the road is strewn with many impediments and obstacles, some of which we have identified. Lack of commitment, delays, policy paralysis, complacency, and many other usual suspects. Therefore, what do we have to do in this age of speed, in the age of digital communication, digital business, and so on? Speed is of the essence. So we should have started acting yesterday, but we still haven't started. I hope we'll do better in the future. Thank you.
Let me start with an admission of guilt. I am actually a rocket scientist. There was some mention briefly of rocket science yesterday. And so I tend to think in numbers rather than words. But I'll come to the numbers a little bit later. And I'll start with a little bit of history. Not many of us know of this economist named Angus Madison. Anybody here? One. Okay, good. Two maybe. When he died about 4 years ago, not a single newspaper in India carried his obituary. Nor did a single channel announce that such an economist had passed away. Now, Madison specialized in a particular activity, and that's what we can call paleoeconomics. That is, he looked back at countries, going back 2,000 years, to see how they were positioned economically. And then he drew a very nice graph. I had prepared all this in a PowerPoint presentation, but for whatever reason, we were told no PowerPoint presentations. Well, a picture paints 1,000 words, but so let me explain what he showed in this graph. See, for the first 1,500 years of the last 2,000 years, starting from 81 to about 1500 AD, the richest economy in the world was India, or that region that we now know as India. And around 1500 AD, briefly for about 250 years, China overtook India as the largest economy in the world. And then from about 1700 AD, there's no way you could stop Europe. Just rocketed ahead of these two countries. And after 1900 AD, it is the US or North America, if you couple Canada with the US, that became the largest economy in the world. So from 1 AD, when India had 33% of global output, it came down to 2% of the global output by the middle of the 20th century. From 1/3 of the world's economy to a tiny fraction of the world's economy. And the decline did not start. See, the lazy explanation is always that India's decline started with colonization, and that's not true. Because if you project Madison's figures back 200 years or 250 years, and you find that the decline of the Indian economy started immediately after the death of Ashoka. And the rise of the Chinese economy started with the unification of China that took place under Emperor Shi Huangdi. That was about 40 to 50 years after Ashoka. And that explains the rise of China. Now, why did the economies of India and China fall into this trap? And Madison has a very simple explanation, and a lot of us tend to ignore that. He said, in 1088 AD, the first university in Europe was set up at Bologna. And that's still in existence today. Nalanda is no more, Taxila is no more. We never reinvented them. In 1096 AD, the second university of Europe was set up. That was at Oxford. And within 500 years, from 1080 to 1500 AD, Europe set up 70 universities. Uppsala probably belongs to that period. For a population in Europe, there was about 70 million people. In other words, during that period, they had one university for every million of people. And at the same time, India had none, and China had none. And our first university in modern India probably started in 1857 or 58. So that was his very simple explanation of what happened to his economies. They are intricately linked with the kind of higher education and research systems that you can sustain. And this is where the failure took place. And we are still slow to learn. We still don't have one university per million of population. China has reached that target. And one of the reasons why Shanghai Jiatong University was encouraged to do these rankings was because China was mandated by Deng Xiaoping to not only have one university per million of population, but also to have 100 world-class universities. And that's how this idea of world-class came into the whole argument. So Jiatong University put up this thing called ARWU, Academic Ranking of World Universities. And at that time in 2003, when they first appeared, there were 3 Indian universities in that list. And over the last 10 years, there has been a decline. Now there's just 1. And that too, it does not appear in the top 100. No, now it's IISc that's in the list. I think the first time it was made, I think Calcutta University was also in the list, along with one of the IITs, apart from the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. Now, there are many rankings that are available. Shanghai, and as Professor Natarajan said, the Times, and the Quacquarelli-Symonds, because Times and QS have separated. But I would go by another ranking that has started from a university in Spain. It's called the Scimago ranking. Scimago does not go by parameters like the number of students who have won alumni who have won Nobel Prizes and field prizes, the number of faculty, because they're a bit too elitist. But instead, they use a methodology that now we call big data, but at that time nobody called big data. See, you have these large aggregators that have created databases of all the scientific activity in the world that goes beyond a certain threshold. One is called the Web of Science. The other is called Scopus. Now Google has its own system which many of us use because it's free. It's called Google Scholar. Microsoft has one called Microsoft Academic Exchange, I think. But what Scimago did was to use the Scopus database. And essentially what it does is this. There are something like 30 to 40 million documents. Each document has about 20 to 30 references, which means that in mathematical terms, if you create what's called a complex network, there are about 30 to 40 million nodes, and then potentially almost 1 billion links between these nodes. And there are mathematical techniques to find out which are the dominant nodes and which are the dominant connections and so on. So here there is no bias. These are purely numbers. And then you can look at these lists author by author, journal by journal, country by country, institution by institution, and so on. And when these lists have been prepared, and the 2013 lists are available on the web, and they have intelligent software which allows you to interrogate those lists and section them by country, by sector, and so on. Now, the best Indian institution that appears in the list is CSIR. That's ranked at number 82. Now, is that good going? How would you reconcile 82 with the fact that India has the second largest population in the world and soon will be the third largest economy in the world? We have no business being at number 82. We should be in the top 10. Let's keep that aside. Let's get to what's more of interest to us. You can look at a list of the higher education institutions from India which appear in this list. About 148 of them out of the 2,000 odd that Scimago has listed as crossing the basic threshold. Out of this 148, the number one is the Indian Institute of Science, and in the top 10, mostly there are IITs. And then just one or two state universities in the top 15, and that is Jadavpur and Anna University. And the best university from Kerala comes in at number 37. I think Vijay Kumar asked me that question once, and I gave him that number. CUSAT is number 37, and the second best university in Kerala is number 77. Now, that is disgraceful. We are talking of rankings within India. That is Kerala University. Of course, our Vice Chancellor is here. Now, that is disgraceful for Kerala. Because I will give you the context for that. As Professor Natarajan rightly said, he was the one who taught me thermodynamics, by the way, and I use that extensively in my work nowadays to do these rankings. Now, to put that in context, let me tell you that in the last 16 years, the number one in the National Schools Athletic Championship in India was Kerala. 16 years in a row, Kerala was number one in athletics. Then why are we number 37 in science? And number 77 in science. What's gone wrong? It's no point in blaming the government because there's only so much that the government can do. Its coffers are limited. So historically, what went wrong with Kerala? So again, I have to go back to a little bit of history. When I joined at Cochin University, I was invited by the KSSP to give a keynote lecture at the meeting which was held in Thrissur at that time. I think some of you were present there. And I talked about how Kerala is performing in the world of research. And I thought it's best to benchmark Kerala with another region of the world which had a relationship in its geopolitical area which is similar to Kerala. See, Kerala has always been on the margins of India's history. It was never a key player in India's history. It was always on the margin. Then if you look at Europe, you find the same thing is true of Scandinavia. There are 5 countries with a population of 24 million at that time, which was similar to Kerala's population at that time of 33 million. And these 24 million managed to have 24 universities in the top 500 in the Shanghai list. 24 universities from Scandinavia made it to the top 500 in Shanghai, a region which had 24 million population, which had all the historical disadvantages that Kerala had. India had one and Kerala had none. Now, if you go back 2,000 to 3,000 years in history, Kerala was a very important player in the trade of this region. As Professor Dinesh Singh said yesterday, we had ships that traveled all the way to Africa, to Arabia, traded with the Romans, traded with the Arabs, traded with the Africans. And we sold them spices and got back gold. And we were very rich. And what did we do with the gold? I hear some laughter. We gave them to our women folk, we buried them underground, and we gave them to our gods. And intentionally, I use gods in the plural. Yes. And while Europe was building, they did build palaces and they did build cathedrals, but Europe also built magnificent universities. We built temples and we built palaces, but we forgot to build universities. And I like to bring to your attention a very controversial middle page article that Philip Altbach wrote in the Hindu about 3 years ago. And His lines went somewhat like this. It's not often that the Hindu temple wakes up to find 98,000 crores. He probably would have used $5 billion in its basement. And he gave a suggestion for what Kerala can do with that money. And he said Kerala can use it to build a world-class university, $5 billion. Now, if you go back to what is the anatomy of a global university, a world-class university, Professor Natarajan just read out a list that Mashelkar had prepared. But let me, as an engineer, put numbers to that. See, this exercise was done by a person called Ben Sauter, who now works with the Times Group. He is the expert consultant on the Times rankings. And he said typically a world-class university, I mean, he's looking at the experience of universities like Harvard, MIT, and many universities in Europe. He said a typical world-class university will have an endowment of $1 billion, 5,000 crores. No university in India has an endowment like that. There's an annual budget of $2 billion, that is 12,000 crores. I think the entire higher education system in India does not come up to that. I remember when I was a VC, Kerala's total education outlay for the Higher Education Council was about 300 crores. Where is 12,000 crores? And the other important thing to realize is the matter of science, as Professor Olaf Linden pointed out. See, when you do these rankings, you have many dimensions that come into it. One is size, the number of papers you produce. And that depends on the number of active researchers you have apart from the budget that you use. But the other thing is quality. And again, quality can be measured in many different dimensions. But it's a way to aggregate all of them into a composite indicator. So size is also important. And what these world-class universities have is a faculty strength ranging from 2,500 to 5,000, which typically means they're about 10 times the size of an Indian university. And they have about 25,000 students. That means a student-faculty ratio which ranges from 5 to 10. We have nothing like that. See, what went wrong with the Indian higher educational system was that we created higher education in the manner of teaching shops, which are franchised from universities that affiliated them, and that model still functions. We have 500 universities with 30,000 colleges, and that's not the way to go. In fact, it's better to have that model in which you have one university for every million people. And I made that recommendation as such at that time when I was a member of the Higher Education Council here. I said, have one university for every million people here, which means you cluster the colleges together so that they can share resources. But no college in India, in Kerala, was willing to share resources. And I think Kiran Panikkar tried very hard to do this cluster concept. Yeah, but no college agreed. But that's the way to go, because it doesn't make sense to have a small college with 2 faculty members in physics. But you have a university with 2,500 faculty members, your physics department will have 100 to 200 faculty members, and they will create that critical mass that will produce Nobel Prize winners. You cannot do that with 2 faculty members, and that's what's going wrong still today. And we are still increasing the number of colleges. We have no business in doing that. By fiat or by inducement, we must force all these 30,000 colleges to come down to about 1,500 universities. And then you'll get that magical number of 1,500 universities. And that's the starting point. Now, where do you get the money from? Now, don't ask the government to give you money, because the best universities in North America did not depend on government money. They came from civil society. And if you look at that, Kerala is a very rich area of this country. The most magnificently appointed establishments in Kerala are the ones that sell gold, wedding fashions, cars, and motorcycles. And the most dilapidated are the government colleges and the government universities. So our money in Kerala is chasing the wrong priorities. So don't blame the government for this. There's only so much the government can do with the meager kind of taxes that we give and the very low tax base there is in the country. Now, in this connection, I just want to add something that will gladden Dr. Vishwanathan's heart. In that list of 148 universities, which are the top from India, VIT is now appearing, Shastra is now appearing, which means that a few private universities are appearing. Many NITs, which are very well funded, are not in that list. So I hope one day VIT will come in the top 10 in India. And I was just introduced to him today, and I was telling him that there are things he can do in a private university that you can't do in a government university or in a government college. So this is what's wrong with the country. The people do not understand that education of the highest quality needs inputs of the highest quality. I heard it being mentioned yesterday that Kerala is a cheap destination to do education. And that's actually a wrong way to look at it. I did this exercise when I was here in 2008. I just listed down how much it costs to provide an education to a student in India. The lowest is 2,000 rupees per student per year, and that is IGNOU. Because they had something like 2 million students and a budget of 400 crores. At that time, the most expensive education in India was that at the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. There it cost 20 lakhs to educate a student per year. But within a few years, ISB was ranked among the top business schools in the world. That's what it takes to provide education of that level. Money. You need money on that scale. If you look at the amount of money that the Indian government spends on research, it spends a very little amount of money compared to the other countries, but on a very small population of scientists. The population of scientists, what's called the full-time equivalent researchers in China, is 10 times that in India today. We have about 160,000 scientists in India. There's 1.5 million scientists in China. But if you take the funding per scientist, it works out to about $150,000 per head. The cost in China and India are about the same. So if you have to scale up Indian research by 10 times, India has to find 10 times that amount of money. Now again, don't blame the government for it. What's happening today is that the ratio of government spending on research to the ratio of private sector spending on research is 4:1. It should be the other way around. It should be 1:4. And if you want to achieve that 1:4, again, you don't need rocket science to compute all this. The private sector has to increase its funding of research by a factor of 16. 1/6. I don't see in the near future that happening. And if that does not happen, then India will keep going around and down in these rankings. There may not be a top university in the top 500. Now, there's none in the top 200. And if Kerala goes with this business as usual policy, then CUSAT ranking will go down from 37 to 47 to 57. And Kerala University may even drop out of the top 100. And VIT may actually do better than Kerala University and CUSAT. So I think I close my argument here today. Thank you all very much, and thank you for inviting me.